Ken Trahan with Lenny Van Gilder. It's our First NBC Bank weekend preview brought to you by First NBC Bank with 35 locations throughout the greater New Orleans area and beyond. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNoah.com. It is, of course, another holiday weekend, New Year's Day on Friday. Happy New Year to you, one and all. And, of course, we start with LSU because the Tigers had a solid, impressive performance in the Texas Bowl as they defeated Texas Tech in convincing fashion, which to me was no surprise, Lenny. Texas Tech is awful defensively, but they were sure exciting to watch offensively. I believe that Mahomes is the best quarterback I've seen in college football this year. I believe that. And I haven't seen a player faster than Grant. So that was a skilled team. But LSU offensively took care of business. They were impressive.
Yeah, I mean, what you found out is what Big 12 football is all about.
Yes.
They can get up and down the field and they can score, but they can't stop anybody. There was a reason that Texas Tech was third to last in the nation in rush defense, and we saw it. Although, look, give them credit. They stacked up 9 and 10 in a box. I know people were, screaming through social media, why are they trying to throw the football and all this kind of stuff? That's why, because Texas Tech basically came out there and said, we dare you to throw the ball. And eventually they did. And look, give Harris credit. He made he missed some things. All right. He wasn't perfect by any means, but he made some nice passes, especially when he had, one-on-ones with some of his receivers who got some separation, made some plays. But then we come back to Leonard Fournette, who was just, who was everything we thought he could be in this game. 5 touchdowns to tie an all-time bowl record, to tie an LSU single-game record, bowl or otherwise. Did not get the 2,000 yards, but, I think that was probably on him, and that just shows you what kind of guy he is. He probably could have gone back in the game, and he said, look, it's time to give some of these other guys a shot. I've carried the ball 300 times this year. Let some of these other guys get some carries here.
Yeah, guy's got his opportunity, looked really good, and Darrell Williams got a cookie with a touchdown. Good for him from John Ehret High School. But you're right, that's the kind of guy Fournette is. What's most impressive about him is the fact that LSU does not have a great offensive line. Now, I'm not saying they're bad. They're solid, but they're not great by any stretch. And they don't have a passing game. So for him to produce the way he's produced tells you how special he is.
And we get to see him for another year. That's the best part of all. 47 yards away from 2,000 in a 12-game season. And I hear all this stuff, if the McNeese game hadn't been called off at the beginning of the year, it easily gotten 2,000. You're right, but you know what? It did. But it did, okay? So, guess what? When Herschel Walker played, they only played 11 games. They didn't count bowl game stats. So nobody's going back and saying, hey, go let him play another game and let's go back and count his bowl game stats. It doesn't work that way, okay? You play the hand that's dealt under the rules that are there at the time. Pete Maravich played college basketball out of 3-point shot, so how far can we take that?
Well, you mentioned LSU basketball, so I guess we got to mention that too. Yet another disappointing home loss to Wake Forest. Wake Forest is a good team, but not outstanding. And LSU's at home. They tried to play zone. I don't care what defense they play. They don't defend anyone, and they're inconsistent on the offensive end. And Ben Simmons is too unselfish. He shares the ball too much, doesn't look for his shot. But this really comes down to a team that simply is not fulfilling its potential, Lenny. There's no other way to say it. They're going in SEC play, and they're going to start off with Vanderbilt and Kentucky. And they haven't played anybody as good as those teams, in my estimation, yet this year.
You're right. And it's going to be a challenge. And we're going to find out very quickly, just what happens. It's not like you could suddenly flip on a switch, I don't think. But, LSU has put itself behind the 8 ball to the point where it may have to go 15-3 in the SEC if it has any hopes of being an NCAA at-large team at this point. Otherwise, you're talking about winning the SEC tournament. We're not even to January 1st yet. This was a preseason top 25 team. So, but at least we're getting into conference play, and at least we're getting into games that mean a little bit. Tulane got their conference season started yesterday against Memphis. And they've got UConn at home Saturday night, talking about big games. LSU, Kentucky next Tuesday night at the PMAC. That should be a lot of fun, and it'll get all the ESPN hype, if you will. And in fact, they already started. But it's those kind of games are the fun games to watch. When you get into conference play, you don't want to see all the games against the Alabama A&Ms and the teams with a bunch of hyphens and directions in their names. It's just not you don't want to see that.
Congratulations also to UNO. They reached a milestone with a victory over Blue Mountain. 300 wins at home, right?
300 wins at Lakefront Arena. How many of those did you see?
Yeah, plenty.
Yeah. So
I guess a lot better teams than Blue Mountain, I might add.
Exactly. We can remember some great days in there, but still they are getting ready to start conference play as well. Their final tune-up before they begin on Monday. So it's it's that time. We can really start talking about college basketball when it's meaningful.
Pelicans, of course, back home against the Clippers on Thursday night. No Blake Griffin here, so Pelicans catch a team that's wounded a bit, but they were wounded themselves at Orlando. Played lousy, coming off of looking good for 4 games, so it's kind of a head-scratcher. I wrote about that. This team just can't seem to put anything together on a consistent basis. But, Lenny, it all starts with defense. They just don't defend. 55% shooting by Orlando. They got what they wanted in the paint, 58 points in the paint, and they had wide-open looks for 3. So when you can't defend the paint, you can't defend the line, what can you defend? How can you win? You can't outscore people every night. And they were not on offensively in that game. And when that happens, they're not going to win.
You got to be able to rely on your defense. Look, even we go back to the game before against Houston. While it was up and down and it was high scoring, when it came down to it,
was
the
defense.
Pelicans locked down in the last 6 minutes of that game and defended. That's what you got to do. You want to stick around, and when it comes down to crunch time, you have to be able to defend. Well, it never really came down to crunch time on Monday night, but like that, you're going to throw clunkers in an 82-game season once in a while. The problem is the clunkers have been far too frequent through the first 2 months of the season. Now, again, the injuries are no longer an excuse. You're one person away from being 100% healthy. Now it's just a matter of trying to get into a rhythm in games like Monday night, just enable you or disable you from doing that.
Another one of those SEC Big 12 matchups in the All-State Sugar Bowl, right? Another great game that should be outstanding with 2 very good teams, Oklahoma State, Ole Miss. No Kemdichi, of course, you know that. 2 teams that figure to score a lot of points. This one is a little bit unlike Texas Tech and LSU because Oklahoma State's a little better than Texas Tech defensively, but they give up a lot of points too.
They do, and I think, look, Ole Miss has as well. I mean, look back at that Arkansas game, what happened there. But I think Ole Miss is a little bit better defensively, and that's why I would give them an edge in this game. This is an interesting matchup from this standpoint, from a business perspective, and obviously the reason these games are all created this time of year is to bring people into our city. The game's a sellout. This is the first of 8 matchups we'll see SEC Big 12. You got 4 years where you'll have a semifinal. The other 8 years, you're taking the best team from the SEC, the best team from the Big 12 that doesn't make the playoff, and they're going to be here. And while you had to maybe scratch your head a little bit in terms of when this relationship was created. I mean, obviously you maintain the SEC tie that has been there for so long, going back to the days of Bear Bryant. This new tie with the Big 12, how would it play out? Well, look, the game's a sellout. So I think it's, at least for the first time, regardless of the product that ends up being on the field Friday night, it's a win for the Sugar Bowl and a win for the city.
No question about it. And finally, the Saints, of course, their season finale at Atlanta this Sunday. So many question marks surrounding, will it be the last game for Sean Payton as the head coach of the Saints? What about Drew Brees? What about Marcus Colston? What about Jari Evans? What about Zach Strief? What about Thomas Morstead? We could go on and on. Those questions will be answered, I would think, rather quickly when this season is over with, starting with the head coach who has continuously dispelled any notion that he'll leave, but the rumors keep circulating as jobs continue to open up.
All he's got to do is say, I'm not going anywhere. But then again, as Nick Saban taught us a few years ago when he left the Dolphins for Alabama, that didn't necessarily mean anything. So, but you're right. Is this the last game in a Saints uniform for so many of these guys? I found it interesting that the Saints, on the cover of their program last Sunday, put those 4 guys that had been here since 2006. And you have to begin to wonder, okay, how many of these guys are going to be back here when we come to the Dome for the first time in 2016? It's 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. I think it may hover in the 1 or 2 range. Let's see how it all plays out. I think the most likely one to be back is Brees. Although if Peyton is not here, I think all bets become go off the table at that point in terms of what the direction of this franchise is for 2016.
And then of course Evans would be number 2 because he's still got a couple of years left on a contract. I think it's pretty likely that Marcus Colston won't be back and Zach Strief won't be back because of Andrew Speed's presence. But stay tuned. If they're not back, kudos. Great job. you will be missed because you guys have done a terrific job for this franchise. So look forward to it. And by the way, they play the Falcons in Atlanta. So that's always a treat regardless of the circumstances. And this one, of course, doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme other than where you end up picking, because that's it, Lenny, as we close. Right now, the Saints would be 12th, right where they were last year if the draft were held today. So if they lose this game, they could get as high as you and I saw as number 8 or even 7, perhaps, in the draft. So this game means a lot in a lot of different ways.
It does. And it also means a lot to the Indianapolis Colts, who need like the craziest combination you ever want to see to make the playoffs. Besides winning and losing, it comes down to strength of victory and strength of schedule. And if the Saints win, I think that now I'm getting confused here. But it can affect the AFC South of all things.
That's the way to get out of it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. One of the Colts or the Texans, if this thing, but it's a crazy set of circumstances that would give the Colts a chance. Them winning, the Texans losing, and 8 other teams doing something on Sunday. It's insane.
As Johnny Carson used to say, weird stuff. So there you go. It's strange. Happy New Year to you, one and all. That's our First NBC Bank weekend preview, brought to you by First NBC Bank with 35 locations throughout the metropolitan New Orleans area and beyond. That's First NBC Bank, proud sponsor of SportsNoah.com. I'll see you next year.
See you next year.
All right. For Lenny, I'm Kenny. God bless you. Talk to you next year.